Dear friends, in our first topic, we have studied what are cryptograms, what are lower cryptograms, what are higher cryptograms, and now we are going to study the first group of the cryptogramic botany, that is algae. Now this term algae was first used by Carl Linnaeus in 1753, and it is derived from a Latin word alga, which means seaweed. Though the literal meaning of alga is a seaweed, in general the term algae is applied to all simple thalloid green or autotrophic plants such as pond scum, stoneworts, seaweeds, and like. So this is a large heterogeneous group of plants and collectively called as algae. So it becomes difficult to give a precise definition of algae, as it includes a varied number, nature of the simple thalloid green plants. Different workers defined in a different manner. Prescott in 1969 defined it as algae are chlorophyll bearing thalloid plants, chlorophyll bearing thalloid plants. That means green thalloid plants without root, stem and leaf. And the members of this group usually reproduces by means of spores as a means of asexual reproduction, and by means of gametes in case of sexual act or sexual method. Here gametes are produced in sex organs, and these sex organs are unicellular. So some algologists defined algae as a simple thalloid green or autotrophic plants that reproduces by means of unicellular sex organs, or if multicellular, they are without sterile jacket. Now, this group of simple thalloid autotrophic plants shows certain characters. So next point is a distinguishing or general characters of algae. If you observe the occurrence of algae, it is universal. That means it grows everywhere where there is a presence of light. Most of algae are aquatic in a habitat. Some are terrestrial and few algae shows unusual habitats. Aquatic algae may grow in a freshwater bodies or in a seawater or in a brackish water, and accordingly they are called as a freshwater algae. Those which occurs in a seawater or oceans are called as marine algae, and those which occurs in a brackish water are called as a brackish water algae, or some refers it as a estuarine algae. Here, these aquatic forms may be present in a water as a free floating masses called as planktonic algae, whereas number of algal members remains attached to the bottom of water body or any other object present in water body are called as benthic algae. So, aquatic forms are further divided into three different types depending upon type of water in which they occur as a freshwater algae, marine algae and brackish water algae. Based on their position in a water body, if they are free floating they are called as planktonic, and if they are attached to the bottom or any other object in a water body as a benthic algae. Then those algal members which grows on a moist soil are called as terrestrial algae, whereas a large number of algae shows their occurrence in unusual habitats. For example, some can grow in a hot water springs which are commonly called as thermal algae. On contrary, some algae has capacity to grow over the surface of ice which are commonly called as snow algae. Some algae grows inside the plant. For example, some of the blue-green algal members usually occur in a body of higher plants like gymnosperms or pteridophytes, showing a symbiotic association. The common example of such algae that occurs inside the body of other plants includes the presence of blue-green algal members in coralloid roots of cycas, or presence of some blue-green algal members in a mucilage cavities of Anthoceros, which is a bryophytic member commonly called as hornwort, and so on. Whereas some algae has capacity to grow over the surface of aquatic animals called as epizootic algae, and some they are present inside the body of animals that are called as endozoic. So many such unusual habitats are colonized by different members of algae, and some algal members can grow as a parasite on higher plants that we are going to discuss in a next point. Then the plant body of this member is a thalloid. Thallus is a body that cannot be differentiated into root, stem and leaf. And this thallus ranges from very small microscopic thallus, which hardly measures about 1 micron, as in a case of green alga chlorella, to a macroscopic multicellular large alga that measures about 200 feet in length, and that is laminaria, which is a brown seaweed. So as far as the plant body or thallus is concerned, it shows a great variation that ranges from a small microscopic to a large multicellular macroscopic thallus. Then the cell organization in a case of algae is either prokaryotic or eukaryotic. Pro means primitive, karyon means nucleus. So this type of cell organization is present in one of the group, that is cyanophyta, which is commonly called as blue-green algae. Whereas in the rest of algae, the cell organization is eukaryotic. Eu means true, karyon means nucleus. So here you can have a true nucleus, and all algae except blue-green are eukaryotic in their cell organization. Then the cell wall is mainly composed of cellulose, which is a characteristic feature of this group. Then all or almost all members of this group are autotrophic in their mode of nutrition, and this is due to presence of a photosynthetic green pigment, that is chlorophyll. So these are green in color and autotrophic. Here the exception to this character is Cephaloros virescens, in which the chlorophyll is absent and therefore it is a parasitic alga that causes red spot disease in some of angiospermic plants. So almost all except few like Cephaloros, they are autotrophic in a mode of nutrition. And this autotrophic mode of nutrition is due to presence of photosynthetic pigments. Now these photosynthetic pigments in algae include chlorophyll, carotene, xanthophyll, phycobilin, and so on. Here, in a different groups of algae, there are 5 different types of chlorophyll, such as chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, chlorophyll C, chlorophyll D, and chlorophyll E. So, in algae, about 5 different types of chlorophyll pigments are present, as in case of higher plants you can have only chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. Then carotenoids, xanthophylls are other accessory photosynthetic pigments. Amongst the xanthophyll, fucoxanthin is a important pigment that is present in a brown algae. As far as phycobilins are present, you can have phycocyanin and phycoerythrin. These are the 2 important phycobilin pigments, phycocyanin and phycoerythrin. So this phycocyanin is a blue color pigment and phycoerythrin is a red color pigment. And these two pigments, they are characteristically present either in a blue-green algae or a red algae. When this phycocyanin is present in a blue-green algae that belongs to class Cyanophyta, it is referred as a C phycocyanin and C phycoerythrin. Whereas these pigments, they are present in a red algal members, the prefix to these pigments is R instead of C, that is R phycocyanin and R phycoerythrin. Now all these pigments, they are present in a different members or different groups in such a way that a characteristic combination of chlorophyll, carotene, xanthopin and phycobilin impart a characteristic color, and therefore you can divide these algal members into different groups such as blue-green algae that are blue-green color, green algae that are grass-green in color, red algae that are red in color, brown algae that are brown in color. Here, in case of blue-green algae, you can have a chlorophyll A, alpha and beta carotene, and xanthopin pigment. Whereas in a green algae, there is presence of chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, carotene, and xanthopin. In a brown algal members, there is chlorophyll A and chlorophyll C, predominance of fucoxanthin, which is a brown color pigment which masks the green color of chlorophyll, and the thallus appears to be brown. In a red algae, you can have a chlorophyll A and chlorophyll D. Then there is a predominance of R phycocyanin and R phycoerythrin. And in this way, you can have a different color to the thallus of a particular group of algae, and accordingly they are commonly called as blue-green algae, green algae, brown algae, red algae, golden brown algae, and so on. Then all algae are autotrophic in mode of nutrition and produce their food material by a process of photosynthesis, and therefore reserve food is in the form of starch. Basically, starch is a reserve food material. It may be cyanophycean starch or true starch as in green algae, or laminarian starch in case of brown algae, or Floridian starch as in a case of red algae. But in some members, it is in the form of paramylum starch in some members of euglenophyceae. Then these members usually lacks tissue differentiation. Lacks tissue differentiation. When thallus is a well developed multicellular, but all the cells in a thallus are more or less of same type. That means there is a absence of tissue differentiation. If it is there, it is a very little tissue differentiation. Then there is a complete absence of vascular system. Vascular system is completely absent. Now, these members reproduce by means of vegetative method, asexual method, and sexual method. Now, this vegetative reproduction is a very common that takes place by means of different types of structures that are developed on thallus, whereas asexual reproduction usually takes place during favorable conditions, when that alga grows under favorable condition, it reproduces asexually by means of a special structure which is called as spore. And there are different types of spores, and the structure of spore varies according to the conditions to which that particular alga get exposed. When conditions are highly favorable, it produces zoospores, and as conditions becomes harsh, it leads to the development of thick-walled non-motile spores which are called as hypnospores. Whereas sexual reproduction in algae is either isogamous, unisogamous, or oogamous. Here, the isogamy is a very simple and primitive type of sexual reproduction in which both the fusing gametes, they are exactly identical in their morphology as well as physiology. So, you cannot differentiate these gametes into male and female even. So, when the two fusing gametes are exactly identical, the fusion of two such isogametes is called as isogamy, and which is considered as very simple and primitive method of sexual reproduction that is present in some algal members. Another type of sexual reproduction is anisogamy, in which the two fusing gametes differ either in their physiology or they differ in their morphology. Here, if both the gametes are morphologically identical but they differ in their physiology, so here you can have two exactly identical gametes fusing together. So morphologically they are isogametes, but one of the gamete here becomes more active and donates its content to the other. So here this is a recipient, so called as female, and as it donates its content, it becomes male. So morphologically they are exactly identical, but they differ in their physiology, and therefore it is called as a physiological anisogamy. Whereas in case of morphological anisogamy, you can have a distinct male and female sex organ. The male sex organ is a very small in size, whereas female sex organ or a gamete, male sex organ produces male gamete which is a very small in size, and the female gamete is a comparatively very large in size. So morphologically they are different, as well as they differ in their physiology also, and therefore it is called as a morphological anisogamy. Whereas a highly advanced type of sexual reproduction is present in the members of some algae, and it is called as Algae, in which the sex organs are well developed. Male sex organ is called as antheridium, female sex organ is called as ovonium, and here antheridium produces anthrozoid, or some refers it as sperm, and ovonium produces a female gamete that produces egg. Now here the ovonium is a comparatively large in size as compared to male sex organ. This ovonium usually produces a single large gamete that is called as egg. So ovonium is a large and produces single large female gamete that is egg. And towards maturity there is a formation of a special structure which is called as a receptive spot. Whereas usually antheridium is of normal size, that of a vegetative thallus, and each cell of this antheridium produces one or few, one, two, or in some cases few flagellated motile anthrozoid or sperm. When they mature, they release outside the antheridium directly in water, and through the water they swim freely in water and comes in contact with the mature ovonium and usually get attached to this mature ovonium at receptive spot, and in an act of fertilization, then process of fertilization takes place in such a way that the content of the anthrozoid, that is male nucleus, enters into the ovonium, where the fusion of male and female nucleus takes place so as to form zygote. Now, this type of sexual reproduction is considered as highly advanced amongst the algae. Highly advanced type of sexual reproduction in an algae, in which the female's gamete retains in the female sex organ even after process of fertilization for some time, and then the zygote develops. Here another character of the algae that differs from other members of plants is the absence of embryo development. Usually after the zygote is formed, zygote develops into embryo. But in algae, zygote never develops into embryo. So no embryo formation after the process of fertilization. This is the most important characteristic feature. And number of algae in their life cycle may show alternation of generation. Alternation of generations. And depending upon the morphological nature of generations, if they are identical, then that life cycle is called as isomorphic. If they differ in their morphology, then it is called as heteromorphic. Here, in case of brown alga Ictocarpus, the two generations in life cycle are exactly identical, sporophyte and gantophyte. You cannot distinguish by observing their morphology. You have to observe whether the reproductive structure behaves as a spore or behaves as a gamete. That means that spore independently germinate to produce new plant, then you can say it is a sporophytic. And if that reproductive structure requires fusion, then the product of fusion, that is called as zygote, develops into a new plant. So here the thallus is exactly identical, but the reproductive structures produced behaves than that of the spore, and therefore this type of life cycle is called as a isomorphic. Example, Ictocarpus. Whereas in case of heteromorphic type of life cycle, that you can characteristically observe in a brown algal member like Laminaria. Here the sporophytic plant body is a very huge, measures about 100 to 200 feet in length. It has a basal hold fast, a narrow stalk-like structure which is called as type, and elongated structure that is called as blade. So this structure apparently looks like a leaf of angiosperm, and this is a sporophyte. It produces spores, and these spores, they germinate to produce fuse-celled heterotrichous filamentous gametophytic thallus, which is microscopic. You cannot observe by means of unaided eye. So this is a fuse-celled microscopic structure. This is a very large, about 200 feet long thallus. So morphologically they are different, and therefore such a life cycle is called as a heteromorphic type of life cycle, or heteromorphic alternation of generation. So these are the characters of algae. Thank you.